Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session of Fuqua LinkedIn Live. My name is Inês Black, and I am an assistant professor at the Fuqua School of Business.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sharique Hasan, and I'm an associate professor in the strategy group at the Fuqua School of Business.
Great. So welcome, and thank you for joining this afternoon. We want to keep this very interactive, so please start sending your questions as you want. We're going to talk a little bit in the beginning, but we're going to quickly open to discussion. So today, as you may know, the topic of the day is the job market in 2020. And of course, this topic cannot be talked about without talking about the coronavirus pandemic. It's been obviously a major public health crisis, but also a major shock to the labor market. It has forced an estimate of 36 million people into unemployment, and that puts us at a roughly 15% unemployment rate, which is comparable only to that during the Great Depression. So this is, of course, an unprecedented crisis, and this is going to have a lot of implications as to what's going to happen to people who are looking for a job. Of course, when we started the research that we're presenting today, which is research done by Sharique, myself, and our co-author Rem Koning at Harvard Business School, we had no idea this was going to happen. Of course, none of us did. And we did our survey and our research, we did it earlier in 2020, in January. And in many ways, the job market was very different then. First of all, we were almost at full employment, and therefore firms used this tool of hunting for talent, which we will explain what it is, in order to get talent that they needed to be able to grow. What we find in our paper is that about 50 to 60% of jobs are obtained through a firm's direct investment in finding the right candidates. And this is what we mean with hunting for talent. It's that it's firm-driven as opposed to necessarily application-driven. And so, of course, this result of ours is not only overwhelming. The majority of people get their jobs by the firms directly reaching out to them in one way or another. But also it has a lot of variation according to the types of jobs that you may think. So for example, we find that jobs in business and in STEM fields, they are the ones that get the majority of hunters for talent, if you will. We also find a considerable regional variation. So in San Jose, this percentage goes up to almost 65%. And we also find some variation according to income levels. So the higher end of the income distribution of jobs also gets more hunting for talent from firms. And so the big question now, and this is sort of the landscape that we found in January 2020 for the US, the big question now is, Sharique, what is going to happen now that we have this major shock? How is this going to change the patterns that we found earlier this year?
Thanks, Inez. So that's a really interesting question. And, the real answer is actually we don't know, but we can take a good guess about what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So there's really two ways that firms kind of hunt for talent. One is they use existing employees to find their friends or acquaintances who might be a good fit for a role at their company and hunt that way. That makes up about 33% of hiring by firms. And really depending on kind of the occupation and location, firms have increasingly started using social media to go out and look for workers. And that proportion can be as high as 25% in places that are kind of tech heavy like Silicon Valley, which is amazing. 1 in 4 workers may not have even applied for a job. They were recruited by the firm. And so the question is, why is this happening? Is this related to the fact that the labor market really favored workers, that it was very competitive for firms to actually hire workers? And I think that may change some elements of it, but what we also observed in our study is that actually firms have been investing a lot in developing the capabilities to go out and find people. And that's unlikely to just kind of go away overnight because firms have built those capabilities. And anyone who's looked for a job recently, or even in the last couple of years, particularly people who are trying to change careers, applying to a job kind of feels like throwing your resume, like with all your hopes and dreams, into a black hole. and you don't get responses back. And this is kind of an interesting problem. Part of it is that it's actually the reason that firms use tactics like this is not that they get too few applications. What they say is they can't find qualified applications. They're actually getting lots of applications. So some recent figures I saw suggest that about one application at a corporation gets about 250 applicants. Very few people, 4 to 6 maybe, get invited back for an interview, and one person ends up getting an offer. So the odds really, even in recent years, aren't really in favor of the worker. And what's going to happen when hopefully the labor market starts picking up is that you're not going to get 250 applicants. You're going to get a lot more. And so it's possible that firms are going to be much more picky, and they're going to have to go through all these applications. And standing out often means having a referral or a recruiter vouch for you. And so that, I think, is going to be a really, really important challenge for people who are going to be looking for a job, is how do you set yourself apart? And I think, Inês, you can speak a little bit more to this. How do you set yourself up to be a successful candidate in this new environment, maybe even a passive candidate?
Right, that is the money question, right? And in many ways, it's a little bit thinking of everything you just said from the point of view of the potential worker. So if you want to be, to set yourself up for success, in order to stand out from the crowd, from that crowd of so many people who are unfortunately in the need to look for a job again, then you need to think of yourself as a passive candidate. If 50 to 60% of people have gotten their job offers by active firm involvement in the recruitment process, and by involvement, I mean very direct targeting, then you need to think of yourself as a candidate who may already be evaluated even if you have not applied yet. And most likely, this is where your next job offer is going to come from. So this means having a presence online, of course. LinkedIn is an obvious vehicle for this, but there are others that we can also speak about. This means having a clear presence online, and by clear, what we mean is be discoverable and be understandable. These are two words that seem very loaded, but actually what they mean is simply that a recruiter or a firm HR manager, when they look at your profile, they understand what your specialty is and what your skills are. This is so important for you to be able to stand out from the crowd. So make sure that you go through the job offers that you are looking for and see what kind of skills recruiters tend to look. Make sure that your profile makes those skills stand out in a very clear way. So of course, these are just a few initial ideas. There's a lot more that we can talk about. And so maybe I think now is a good time to open up for questions. Please submit your questions through LinkedIn, and we're going to try to get to them all, but we're constrained by time, of course. So let's start. So the first question we have here is from Pulkit Datta. He's an alum. Welcome back. So the question is, with declining revenues, what scope do we see for, okay, thank you. It's back on again. With declining revenues, what scope do we see for sales positions? Yes, this is a really interesting question. Sharique, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. Yes, obviously, companies are having declining revenues. I think the general answer to this is, I think it's going to be challenging for a lot of different positions, and potentially including sales. And there's no question about that. I think if you feel that this is an important area for you to either move to a next position, it may be important to kind of start the process now, because my sense is that the length of time to get a job may extend quite a bit.
Right. Great. So let's see, we have another question here about what types of jobs or industry do we think will be more affected? Yes, this is a key question. Of course, we've kind of looked at this a little bit from a point of view of the aggregate job market in the US. This is going to have very different impacts according to the industry that you're looking at. And of course, a lot is still to be said about this and more research is needed. But I think immediately we are probably going to see a big hit in the hospitality and leisure. And obviously, that means that recruitment made by those firms will also decrease. So we can always think of industries that are more affected by the COVID-19 crisis as industries that likely will have less hiring needs, and therefore they will probably hire less recruiters. And then everything that has to do with with jobs that can have an online presence, such as consulting, legal, auditing, all things that are needed and can be workable from home, these will probably maintain their hiring patterns, if not increase. We don't know if this is the case. There's very recent research on Germany looking at what the hiring needs are going to look like across industries. We still need to know more about that in the US, as far as I know. But Sharique, please feel free to complete my thoughts if I'm missing something.
No, there's another question that I'm happy to answer. Did these research findings surprise you? Why or why not? So yes. For sure. I don't think we were expecting the rate of firms investing in outbound recruiting, this kind of going online, searching for candidates and applying, having them asked to apply to jobs to be as high as we did. Really, that was a major surprising finding. Actually, the interesting thing is that no one had statistics on this before. So one of the things that got us interested in this research question was a Federal Reserve report that found that they asked people, were you on the labor market these days, and did you apply for a job? And they found out the majority of people who switched jobs within the last 3 months had not applied for a job. And that was a really big puzzle. It's like, what's going on? And so we tried to see if there was any other data that was available about this, and there was really nothing. So we decided to do a nationally representative survey. And so we began with actually no real priors about how prevalent this practice was. Our kind of guess was about, maybe 5 to 10%. We were not expecting 20 to 25%, but that's kind of what we ended up finding. So that was very surprising.
Absolutely. We have another question here from another alum, Kuthik, and the question is, searching for talent requires an investment from the company. With declining revenues and low profits, do we think that companies are going to change this strategy in the future? This is a good question. So obviously an important question. I do think that this maybe relates a little bit to the question from before about industries and kinds of jobs. This is going to be very different. So not all industries are going to be affected by these declining revenues and low profits. And so the big question underlying this one is how much workers change industries. If what this crisis means is that jobs are now going to be created disproportionately in new industries versus industries that are being affected today, then this may just mean that then the new industries that need to recruit heavily are going to rely in these types of hunting for talent, right? So the big question is, how much do workers change industries in a way that allows for this strategy to still be profitable?
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. Yeah, I do. Actually, I'd love to add to that as well. I don't think the strategy is going to change. I mean, LinkedIn and other online platforms, there's millions of resumes lying around. This is a great resource for firms to use. That's not going to disappear. In fact, that's going to become even richer as people basically want to look for jobs. They're going to update stuff more. And so I think firms are going to continue to use this. it may be more challenging. They may have fewer recruiters. And so it may be actually even more important to stand out in this kind of passive, search world that we're going to move into.
Right. Absolutely. It can't hurt to be a good passive candidate. That's, I guess, the one of the messages. We have another question from Tracy Wallingford. How did your findings change based on the level of the position or the age of the worker? Actually, they did change substantially. Yeah. So one thing that we find, so I can speak to the age question. So these types of hunting for talent vehicles, they tend to matter more as people get more experience in the labor market, and that obviously correlates very heavily with age. So referrals, for example, start being much more important for the 50+ category that you ask about. And the other question was the level of the position, right? Well, so the exact level, which I'm assuming you're asking about the hierarchy within the firm, this we do not know, but we do have a rough idea of it looking at salary ranges. And so what we also find is that, again, this type of hunting for talent or referral hiring tends to be more important for the higher categories of salaries, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very well. Another question, Sanpat, his or her question, I'm sorry. I don't know the name, I'm sorry for that. Besides skills and past experience, what are the other elements for recruiters to select for an interview?
I can answer that question. So, this is the biggest question that I hear from our MBA students. Is like, I have the skills, I also have the experience. Like, why am I being passed up? And a couple of really interesting things about like recruiting. So from what we did interviews with recruiters after we did the study, and we asked them, like, how do you recruit? And one of the things that we heard is, well, you have a list of jobs that you need to fill, and really the incentives are to fill them. And so basically what recruiters often tend towards is finding people who are doing exactly the same thing at a competitor firm, and trying to recruit people who have exactly that skill and give them a look much more likely than people who are kind of entering into an industry with broadly comparable experience. So definitely the keywords matter, but also the title matters, and the fact that you're doing similar job in another firm. There's a lot of reasons why this is happening. But an interesting statistic we just learned about is that 95% their firms are experiencing about a 95% yield on the offers that they make, based on a survey that we recently read. It's an industry survey, which means that firms aren't really experimenting in their hiring process when it comes to giving offers to workers. The people that they're giving offer to are coming. And so I think what that is doing is it's making actually very hard for people who may even have the skills but may not be exactly in the profile to the T to make it through in the hiring process. And that's challenging pre-COVID, and definitely is going to be challenging post-COVID as well.
Absolutely, and this is also consistent with prior research that has found that firms are investing less in on-the-job training and trying to hire more experienced workers, as you say. We have a question from Tomasz. What are the expected complementary capabilities in terms of organizational structures that would be required to leverage these hiring capabilities? Right, now this is a key question. He even gives an example of communication channels across teams. This is a key question for sure, which we are also exploring. At the moment, I think that I would say that, so one of the complementary capabilities is reputation. So it's one of the things that we found through our interviews with recruiters is that a lot of recruiters, it seemed like, if you think of the distribution of reputation of the firm as like a normal distribution with very few, very known, few kind of well-known, and then a lot of firms that are not known. Then what we see is that at the very high end and at the very low end of the reputation spectrum, we see that hunting for talent makes sense. At the very high end, because it's going to be easy for the contacts of the firm to be converted to yeses, because firm's reputation tends to draw in good candidates. And at the very low end as well, because this is a way for firms to get themselves known. And in fact, we have some quotes of recruiters saying exactly this. We started hunting for talent because nobody knew about us. And this was a way for people to know that we were actually hiring. So that's one off the top of my head, but definitely still ongoing on that research. Very well. Another question from Gabriel, alum, welcome. For senior level employees, what specific attributes will stand out the most to differentiate from other job seekers? Right. I think that more than anything, potentially, is being able to make very clear how your experience has translated into hard skills. So making your experience very tangible to a potential recruiter. Sharique, do you have other thoughts?
So a couple of things. One is, I think, highlighting your management skills. Who have you managed? How many people have you managed? How successful were you at managing? I think the other, we are beginning to see some research by folks at Harvard, for instance, have found that for senior level employees, particularly people in the C-suite, but may actually go down to the next level of management, is there's been an increasing demand for people to have soft skills and that can manage teams, that can do essentially the non-technical stuff of running the organization. And Rafael Sadun at Harvard has found that the demand for these skills has skyrocketed. And so communicating that you have these soft skills is going to be very, very critical. I think the other aspect is, what impact has your work had on performance, and to be able to clearly communicate that as well.
Great. We have a question from Susan, also an alum. What social media are you seeing beyond LinkedIn? For example, I'm hearing a lot more about Instagram, but I can't imagine a corporate finance job being advertised on Instagram. So I think that we did give the example of LinkedIn in our the beginning of our little chat. What we have been seeing, and I think Sharique knows more about this than me, what we have been seeing is some sort of spreadsheets, if you will, of talent that have been starting. So some of them existed already, and some of them started being built after the COVID-19 crisis, right, Sharique?
Yep. So one of the really interesting, so what is LinkedIn, right? It's an aggregator. It basically brings together resumes from lots of different places and makes it easy for you to find people. The thing about LinkedIn is it's a nice kind of like low cost way to have your resume lying around, whether you're employed or not employed. But now a lot of people are, unfortunately being laid off. And so companies, Airbnb is a really good example of this, have created databases where recruiters can go and find Airbnb alum who have been laid off to search. And so one thing that I'm seeing a lot of is these kind of ad hoc spreadsheets by firms where former employees list what they do, and recruiters can go through that list. One kind of website is layoffs.fyi, which aggregates all of these. I think that something like that's going to be really important for people who have been laid off. There's other things as well. So anytime you apply in a database, oftentimes the company that basically produces that application software has a database of all the resumes, which they basically allow recruiters to search for as well. So, the key thing is to get yourself in a lot of different databases, but even more important than, I think, being in the database, whether it's LinkedIn or one of these layoffs databases, being findable, searchable. And that means having the right keywords because recruiters are going to be looking for certain things. They want to hire people with a very specific set of skills. So knowing what those keywords are for your industry is going to be very important, regardless of what database you're in.
Great. So gonna get to, there's a lot of questions coming in, so let me just click. Okay, so we have a question from Nicholas Panos, is an alum. Professor Harvey has forecast a shallow U-shaped recovery that begins in the fourth quarter of 2020 and accelerates after a vaccine. How much do we think hiring will lag or possibly lead this timeline? Yeah, I think this is a super interesting question because, and our paper is definitely not about this question in particular of a recession, but it obviously invites that question. So this recession is in many ways similar to others that we've lived before, and in many ways it is not, because, and not to get too deep into it, but there is a question of confidence of people going back out into the world and started spending money, which will catalyze businesses. So if we believe, and I think it's a very safe assumption, that after a vaccine, people will start regaining confidence in being able to go outside and therefore engaging more in consumption, then we can expect, of course, the companies to start hiring back up again. And importantly, one thing that is also key here is that a lot of businesses that are not being open at the moment, new businesses, I mean, may start to appear in that phase of recovery. And so hiring typically lags a bit, and it depends from recession to recession. So it's really unclear what's going to happen to this time. I would say it's probably, there will be at least, I don't know, I don't want to venture too many guesses because our research does not speak to that at the moment, but I would say that we would see a pretty quick comeback in the firms that have ramped up these capabilities of hiring themselves before the floodgates open and the economy comes back in full force. So that's another reason why you may want to think of yourself as a passive candidate, is because in this stage where the firms that have heavily invested in their abilities to recruit, they are going to be the first ones to adapt. I think that's fair to assume, wouldn't you say, Sharique?
Yeah. Hey, Nick, how's it going? Nick was a student of mine.
Oh, wow, cool.
So I think it's going to really depend by firm a lot. And I think Inês is actually right. I think the firms that have really built up this capability and have this capability even after what we've experienced through COVID, if they haven't laid off a large part of their recruiters, is they're going to be able to ramp up a lot faster. The other really interesting point from our study that I've been thinking a little bit about is one of the things we found in our study was actually small firms are much more likely to do outbound recruiting. And we got interesting kind of comments from recruiters that we talked to as well, because small firms are invisible really to the labor market because it's very hard to find jobs that are in small firms. And I think one thing that may actually speed up recovery is there's going to be a lot of small firms that aren't doing this, but they may want to hire and to figure out how they can leverage outbound recruiting to actually get workers back during this recovery. I think that may speed it up as well. So we probably will see a little bit of a delay just because I think you have to build out the organizational infrastructure to hire, figure out who's the right fit and all of that other stuff. And I think the companies that have been investing in this are going to be able to, do it faster.
Great. So we are reaching the end of our half an hour. That went by really fast. We're sorry for not being able to get to all of the questions, but we hope that this was informative. So next week, David Ridley is going to be talking about the changes in scaling up vaccine production for COVID-19. So please make sure you tune in to Professor Ridley's talk a week from today. And and also follow Fuqua on LinkedIn to make sure you get notifications on all of our sessions.
Thank you all for joining us. That was a really fun session.
Yeah, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your afternoon.